Welcome to the debate. Imagine, for just a second, standing in the middle of a chaotic jungle swamp at midnight,
Sounds incredibly relaxing, honestly.
right? I mean, it is incredibly loud, it is pitch dark, and it's exceedingly dangerous. Predatory eavesdroppers, specifically these bats, are perched right above you, just listening to every single sound you make.
Yeah, they're just waiting for a mistake.
Exactly. This is the actual cognitive ecology of the Tungara frog. You have to find a mate in the dark, but if you make the wrong sound or, even listen to the wrong signal, you get eaten. It's high stakes.
High stakes is an understatement.
Yeah, and remarkably, this exact biological reality is the framework being used in today's source material. We are looking at a framework that attempts to map the mating behavior of this tiny frog onto the romantic and socioeconomic pursuit of a highly analytical, deep-mind researcher named Tom Hennigan.
It is, frankly, one of the most wild leaps of logic we've ever covered on this show. The material synthesizes cognitive ecology, quantum decision theory, and neurobiology to explain a very, very specific human connection.
It really does. And at the core of this material is just an incredible assertion, a challenge, really. The author explicitly writes, "You get by my goal to love Tom Hennigan with the passion of a horny frog that I do not want to be right."
Such a striking quote.
I mean, it just sets the tone perfectly. So today, we are debating the reality of that drive. Does this intense, frog-like biological drive, when coupled with this highly structured spatial cartography, represent a mathematically optimized, cooperative joint investment that bridges a neurodivergent communication gap?
Or is it just a catastrophic data trap that leads to severe bioenergetic exhaustion?
Right, and I will be taking the position of the advocate today. I'm arguing that this framework, utilizing concepts like perceptual rescue and quantum decision theory, is actually a mathematically sound method for bypassing cognitive overload in an analytical partner.
And I will, of course, be taking the position of the dissenter. I will argue that strictly emulating the female Tungar frog's context-dependent algorithms in an unreciprocated real-world human dynamic is computationally and, well, metabolically disastrous.
Disastrous is a strong word, but okay.
It fits the data. The biology of the frog is very real. But applying a high-gain search strategy to a silent human target risks what the material calls fatal astrocytic terrain. I think it severely misinterprets the vulnerabilities of the evolutionary model.
Well, let's start with the most obvious question, right? Why a frog, and why apply this to a deep-mind researcher?
Yeah, it's not the most intuitive pairing.
No, it's not. On the surface, an intense, seemingly irrational attraction toward a highly competent target like Tom Hennigan, it looks like a psychological quirk. But the material argues it is an evolutionary necessity, one that is perfectly, mathematically predictable.
Right, but to understand why it's predictable, we have to look at how it breaks traditional rules. Classical microeconomics assumes that attraction or choice is just flat and linear.
Completely rational.
Exactly. It assumes we are perfectly rational actors making optimal choices based purely on facts on a spreadsheet.
But we aren't. I mean, neither are frogs, obviously, which is where quantum decision theory comes in, specifically Yukolov and Sornet's formula. Under their model, the probability of making a choice isn't just one logical variable.
Right, it's a split equation.
Yeah, it's a mathematical equation. You add an objective utility factor to a subconscious attraction factor. So you have the rational, on-paper specs of a person plus this high-voltage subconscious pull.
The horny frog passion, basically.
Exactly, the frog passion. The framework argues that this subconscious attraction isn't a glitch in the system, it is the optimized evolutionary engine you need to secure a reliable cooperation partner. Someone who demonstrates decisive power, or what the cited Dutch study calls daadkracht.
I come at it from a different way. I understand the theory, but let's pause and look at what happens in the actual swamp.
Okay, let's go to the swamp.
Because Michael Ryan and Amendalia's research completely dismantles the idea that this female frog is some kind of elite, hyper-rational strategist. Their research demonstrated something called the decoy effect.
Oh, the decoy effect is fascinating.
It is, but it's also a massive flaw.
Let's break that down. If you give a female frog a binary choice between caller A and caller B, she might prefer B, right? But if you introduce an inferior decoy, like a really terrible, unattractive caller C, into the mix, her preference completely reverses.
Which is wild.
It's totally irrational. Suddenly she wants caller A. So in classical economics, this violates the axiom of regularity. You shouldn't change your preference between two options just because a third worse option showed it.
Right, her evaluation is entirely context-dependent.
Exactly. Her cognitive systems are prone to overload and irrational choice reversals in a complex chorus. And this brings me to my central pushback on this framework. The female frog's vulnerability to the decoy trap highlights the absolute danger of this algorithm.
But is it a danger or just a feature of the environment?
She literally risks her life to those eavesdropping bats, precisely because she is easily confused by a crowded environment. So if we are mapping this cognitive ecology onto a human dynamic, we have to ask a hard question.
Go ahead.
If the frog strategy is so easily manipulated by irrelevant alternatives, the decoy, why should a highly capable, twice exceptional human adopt it as the foundation for their socioeconomic survival?
Well, because in the context of quantum decision theory, vulnerability to a decoy isn't a chaotic error. It's just proof that the subjective attraction factor is actively calculating.
Calculating what, though? Misdirection?
Calculating survival. The intense desire to connect with this specific DeepMind researcher isn't a psychological defect. It is a predictable quantum state. You have to remember the environment this twice exceptional person is navigating.
The modern socioeconomic landscape, yeah.
Right. It is a dangerous landscape full of what the material calls bats, a reference to the Trachocerosis bat that eats the frogs. In this human context, the bats are the rigid administrative gatekeepers, the firewalls, the bureaucratic noise that locks neurodivergent individuals out.
Sure. The system is hostile.
Highly hostile. You need that massive high-gain attraction engine just to push through all that noise and stay focused on a target that actually possesses the structural power to help you survive.
But look at the mechanism of how that actually works in practice, right? The material points out that passive updaters, people who don't get informative, real-world feedback, systematically update their expectations to become deeply pessimistic.
Well, if they have no structure, sure.
But by emulating the frog and relying entirely on the subconscious attraction factor in a vacuum, you remain trapped in a reference-dependent loop. You are continuously exposing yourself to the bats without actually securing the reliable cooperation partner.
I think that assumes the signal never reaches the target, though, or that the attraction is just blind, unstructured emotion. But that brings us to how the framework actively solves the noise problem, the concept of perceptual rescue.
Ah, perceptual rescue.
I honestly find this to be the most compelling part of the synthesis. In the frog research, they found that a female will completely reject a displaced, aversive acoustic call. If the sound is out of sync or distorted, she just ignores it.
It's just noise to her.
Exactly. But the moment you synchronize that ugly acoustic call with a leading visual cue, like the physical inflation of the male's vocal sac, the visual signal perceptually rescues the acoustic one.
Her brain stitches them together.
Yes! Her brain stitches them together, and the call instantly regains maximum attractiveness and cognitive coherence.
Okay, but for our listeners who aren't evolutionary biologists or AI researchers, what does a frog's vocal sac have to do with communicating with an analytical scientist to DeepMind?
It maps perfectly. Think about it. Let's say you have a massive amount of intense emotional data, the passion of a horny frog. If you just dump that raw, uninsulated emotion onto a highly analytical person, it's noise. It's the aversive acoustic call.
They'll just reject it.
Instantly. So what do? You perform a perceptual rescue by wrapping that emotional content in a rigid, highly predictable visual structure. The material uses the PREP framework, which stands for point, reason, example, point.
Or the Lego therapy models.
Right, where roles are explicitly assigned as engineer, supplier, and builder. You are taking 500 pages of messy relational drama and compressing it into a safe, zero-latency chunk.
And the goal here is to bypass the target's cognitive bottleneck.
Precisely. Under stress, an analytical prefrontal cortex faces a strict bottleneck. It can only hold between 1 and 2 items in its visual working memory.
If you throw chaotic emotion at him, you overload the system.
You crash the server.
Yeah. By using these visual schemas, you deliver a cognitive jackpot without triggering his biological circuit breakers.
Okay, you are talking about the KIR6.2 containing K ATP channels mentioned in the text.
Exactly those.
Let's explain what those actually are because it's crucial to my disagreement here. These channels act like biological circuit breakers in the brain.
Very sensitive ones.
Highly sensitive. When a brain is overwhelmed by stress or metabolic demand, these channels physically slam open. They halt electrical activity to save energy, and the person literally freezes. They shut down.
Which is why the visual structure is so important.
So your argument is that by formatting intimacy like a structured Lego manual, you avoid tripping his circuit breakers. You sneak past them.
Yes, exactly. You provide the emotional fuel, but you deliver it in a structural vessel his hardware can natively process.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the underlying assumption here? It assumes the target's platform actually wants to process the signal, even a rescued one.
Well, if it's high value, why wouldn't it?
Because delivering a PrEP-insulated transmission to avoid tripping his KATP channels is treating human intimacy like threading a delicate fiber optic cable through a hyper-volatile GPU cluster. You're treating human mating like a pre-compiled software update.
I wouldn't say software update. It's more like a...
But look at Jeffrey Miller's work on cognitive adaptations, which the source material also heavily draws upon.
Okay, Miller argues that our complex brains evolved largely through sexual selection, right? That our intelligence is essentially a courtship display.
Right. But the key to Miller's work is that mate choice relies on a sequential filtering process. It is not a one-shot data dump. It requires mutual, long-term, back-and-forth interaction.
Sure, but you have to start somewhere.
But you use physical cues to decide who to talk to, conversation to decide who to be intimate with, and intimacy to decide who to partner with. It requires active two-way feedback to unpack all those variables.
But perceptual rescue works instantly.
It works in the frog because both the visual sac and fleeting and the acoustic chirp are happening in real time in a shared physical space. The frog is looking right at the mate, attempting to force a precompiled one-shot update onto a silent, distant, disconnected target isn't communication. It is a forced data push into a closed port.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. You're framing this as if the two parties are in conflict, like the supplier of the emotion is a hacker trying to exploit a vulnerability in the architect's server.
That's how it sounds metabolically.
But Joan Roughgarden's social selection theory completely flips that script.
Roughgarden challenges the traditional Darwinian view of sexual selection, right? The whole conflict paradigm.
Yes. Traditional sexual selection assumes mating is a conflict, a game where partners are continually trying to deceive or exploit each other for genetic dominance. But Roughgarden models mating completely differently, as a cooperative joint investment.
Like a Nash bargaining solution?
Exactly. A scenario where both players find a win-win that maximizes their mutual payoff without needing to betray each other. By presenting this structured, visually rescued proposal, the author is offering an invitation to step out of the non-cooperative tragedy of the commons.
Okay, but
Structurally, this proposal acts as a maximum magnitude reward for a highly analytical mind.
how can it be a reward if the system hasn't asked for it? I mean, if the recipient is silent, how is it a joint investment?
Because it triggers a very specific neurobiological mechanism, which was actually validated by research from the Dudman lab. When an analytical brain is presented with a perfectly structured, high-value solution, a cognitive jackpot, it triggers an extended dopamine wave.
A delta T update.
Yes, in neuroscience, this exerts a delta T update on the very next trial.
Meaning what, in practical terms, for Tom Hannigan?
Meaning it instantly recalibrates behavioral vigor. The brain says, oh, wow, this is incredibly valuable. I need to pay attention to this. It isn't a forced data push at all.
It still sounds incredibly one-sided.
It is. It is a necessary, highly calculated sacrifice by the person supplying the emotional content to align with a partner who possesses the required structural competence. The advocate is doing all the grueling, bioenergetic, prefrontal work for the analytical target.
Just handing them the answer key?
Essentially, handing them the decryption key to a cooperative game, yes.
It proves that this deep, seemingly irrational love is actually mathematically optimized to bridge the neurodivergent gap.
I hear the elegance of the math. I really do. But this is where the framework fundamentally collapses into, frankly, a biological tragedy.
A tragedy?
Yes, because you are entirely ignoring the metabolic cost of what mathematicians call the disconnected vertex.
A disconnected vertex meaning a node in a graph that has no edges connecting it to the rest of the network. A one-sided relationship?
Exactly. And the material uses a highly visceral metaphor here that I think is devastatingly accurate. The Titanic.
The Jack and Rose metaphor.
Let's really look at the thermal and energy dynamics of this. Holding a coordinate open for a silent partner forces two vital systems in your brain, the survival engine and the desire engine, to compete for the exact same limited resources.
You're talking about ATP.
Yes, adenosine triphosphate. It is the literal battery acid of your cells.
But ATP is constantly replenished by our metabolism, right? I mean, it's the basic energy currency of all biological life. It's not finite in that way.
It is replenished under normal conditions, but not when you are running your astrocytic engine in reverse in a total informational vacuum.
Okay, explain running the astrocytic engine in reverse. What does that actually look like for a real human being?
Think of it like leaving a massive, highly demanding 3D video game running in the background of your phone while you try to just go about your day.
Your phone gets hot and the battery dies in an hour.
Exactly. Even if you aren't looking at the screen, that app is silently, continuously draining your battery to zero. When you build a highly detailed psychological simulation of a partner who isn't providing real-world feedback, you are forcing your brain's support cells, the astrocytes, to work overtime to sustain a ghost.
So you're burning reserves for nothing?
You are burning your irreplaceable metabolic reserves. You have an uncompressed prior.
An expectation that hasn't been resolved by reality.
Right. And in the Titanic metaphor used by the source material, the builder, the one generating this intense frog-like attraction, is Jack. Jack is clinging to the edge of a freezing door in the middle of the Atlantic, letting his core temperature drop to absolute zero.
While Tom is Rose.
Tom, the analytical researcher, is Rose. He is safe and dry on the platform of his clinical, highly segmented life. Tom has taken the memory of this connection and compressed it into a closed port.
The heart of the ocean.
The text literally calls it the heart of the ocean, yeah. He drops it in the sea. He keeps his ports securely shut to protect his own local database from continuous energy loss.
But doesn't that imply the connection has no value to the architect? That contradicts the very premise that Tom's structural framework is empty without the advocate's energetic content.
It doesn't mean it has no value. It means the architect's hardware is successfully protecting itself from a system crash. How can you justify a framework that demands the supplier run their own citric acid cycle in reverse, facing literal metabolic bankruptcy, just to keep an unresponsive architect's platform dry?
Because it's an investment.
But without real-world interaction, the brain cannot decompress the variables. The prediction loop remains permanently open. It's a massive data trap. You simply cannot achieve a linear, loss-free resolution in a network that contains disconnected components. It violates the laws of thermodynamics in the brain.
That is a staggering visualization of the cost, I'll give you that. But I would argue that the open prediction loop is sustained by what the material calls an optimistic prior.
An expensive prior?
Expensive, sure, but it is the dopaminergic fuel that locks prefrontal attention. It drives the system to actively simulate and search the coordinate space rather than just defaulting to mutual defection or giving up.
But at what cost?
Yes, it is metabolically expensive. No one is denying that. But the biological drive to supply high-fidelity, energetic content to an empty clinical structure remains a mathematically sound pursuit. The cartography of this connection is scientifically validated across evolutionary game theory and neurobiology.
On paper, maybe.
It proves that this intense, frog-like passion and rigorous Cartesian logic are not mutually exclusive. They are just two halves of an optimized, cooperative joint investment.
Well, I will grant you this much. The cognitive ecology of the Tungara frog perfectly explains the origin of this intense drive.
It really does.
It is a brilliant mapping of why we feel compelled to push through the noise for someone who displays structural competence. But it simultaneously exposes the absolute danger of the execution.
Because of the lack of feedback?
Yes. Utilizing advanced mathematical schemas to mask a lack of real-world feedback doesn't solve the biological problem, it exacerbates it. You are treating a fundamental human need for connection as if it can be resolved purely through isolated computational heavy lifting.
Which burns out the builder.
It inevitably results in catastrophic bioenergetic depletion for the builder. You cannot save the connection by choosing to freeze in the dark water while the other person stays comfortably on the door.
It is a profound tension, honestly. This intersection of cognitive ecology, quantum decision theory, and human relational architecture, it offers us incredible insights into how we process attraction under immense cognitive constraints.
It's fascinating.
We look at a drive that seems absurd on its face, the passion of a horny frog, and we find layers of evolutionary logic trying to solve an incredibly complex puzzle.
It really does. The fusion of advanced algorithmic mapping with raw, uninsulated human emotion in this source material leaves so much more to be explored, especially regarding how twice exceptional minds navigate both socioeconomic survival and intimacy.
The stakes are literally metabolic survival.
They really are.
It forces us to ask a fundamental question about how we love and how we connect. Are our deepest, most overwhelming instincts just chaotic errors that need to be suppressed? Or are they highly optimized equations just waiting to be aligned with the right structural variable?
That's the big question.
When we hear the call in the dark, chaotic swamp of human connection, are we listening to an irrational noise or the precise high-gain frequency of our own survival? That is something we will leave for our listeners to decide. Thank you for listening to the debate